Alright, what's going on, guys, and welcome back. I thought for today's topic we would take a look at 10 lost hip hop albums that you can now own on CD. These are albums that were shelved or just unreleased for whatever reason that over the course of time eventually found an official release on CD. We're just going to pick out 10 random ones from the collection and we're going to talk about them. The legendary album that may single-handedly be responsible for introducing the world to the artist that would become known as MF Doom, this 1994 album saw its first major setback when one half of the KMD duo and MF Doom's brother, DJ Subrock, was struck and killed in a hit and run shortly before the album was completed, leaving the young Zev Levex to finish the project by himself. Upon completion, the record label, Elektra Records, seemingly found fault with the cover art, which featured a Sambo character being lynched, and decided to shelve the album. Though according to Dante Ross, it was more likely that they just didn't believe the album would sell enough to be commercially viable. Either way, the album was cancelled, leading to Zev Levex disappearing from the public eye until he re-emerged as the iconic MF Doom. This album was heavily bootlegged until its official release in 2001, and later on Doom's own Metal Face Records in 2008. More than just an interesting footnote in the late rapper's career, Black Bastards would showcase a lot of the early groundwork for the sound that would go on to define MF Doom's music, and it is an essential release for fans of the rapper's catalog. I, Center of Attention. Another Elektra Records fumble, this 1995 classic, produced by Pete Rock, saw the I group consisting of Grab Lava, Rob O, Marco Polo, and DJ Budokan fall through the cracks after Pete Rock, feeling that the new management at the label didn't truly understand hip-hop, couldn't come to any sort of agreement on how to move forward with the project. It saw his distribution deal fall apart and the album itself was shelved. Probably one of the most bootleg lost albums of the 90s, the LP got its second lease on life in 2003 alongside another rock-produced album, the original Baby Pa, and is an instant classic if ever there was one. This is a must-have for any Pete Rock fans out there, and one I think a lot of people are kind of forgetting about. Cormega, The Testament. Queensbridge legend Cormega started his career with guest features in the early 90s, showing up most notably on Black Poet's 1991 cut, Set It Off, but didn't truly enter the hip-hop zeitgeist until his shout-out on the 1994 Nas track, One Love. Later, Mega gained more traction, appearing alongside Nas on 1996's Affirmative Action, the song which served as the foundation for the supergroup known as The Firm, featuring Nas, AZ, Foxy Brown, and of course Cormega himself. Building off of this momentum, he soon signed a deal with Def Jam and began to work on his debut album, The Testament. Sadly, after a falling out with Nas, resulting in the Firm album being released without Mega, he was replaced with the rapper Nature. This was the start of a series of events that would eventually find Mega's Def Jam debut album shelved indefinitely. Fast forward nearly a decade, and Mega managed to regain the masters for his long-lost debut, officially releasing it on his own legal hustle. The album was an incredibly strong first outing, and while I personally prefer The Realness, which did serve as his debut officially, this album is still a must-listen to for 90s hip-hop fans. Large Professor, the LP. The fact that an artist as important and prominent to early 90s hip-hop as Large Professor could have his debut album shelved is borderline unthinkable. Arguably one of the most important producers from the 90s, lacing classic albums like Main Source's Breaking Atoms, and to a lesser extent Akinyele's Vagina Diner, not to mention the work he did with fellow legends like Kool G Rap, Rakim, A Tribe Called Quest, and Nas, just to name a few. Hip-hop fans were salivating to see what the Main Source legend would cook up with his own debut project. Sadly, his 1996 album, simply titled The LP, was shelved by Geffen Records. The album was widely bootlegged until in around 2002, Large Professor regained the rights to the music and he repressed it himself, as well as a handful of reissues in the years that followed. Like many of the other albums on this list, it turned out to be an absolute classic, making the fact that it was shelved all that much more frustrating. Planet Asia, King Medallions, Black Magic. This is an album I would love to do a deep dive on because in all honesty, so little is known about it that trying to find accurate information is near impossible. Some sources say it was released in 2006, Others 2008, which is around the time that I discovered it, also citing that it was originally a Japan-only release. This Planet Asia Archangel-produced LP is, in my humble opinion at least, one of the greatest hip-hop albums that almost nobody has ever heard. It bears a striking resemblance to MF Doom and Madlib's 2004 masterpiece, Madvillainy, in the way that it's sonically put together, even as far as the random skits strewn throughout. But whereas Madvillainy was a lighter, more whimsical album, Black Magic is dark, raw, and above all else, absolutely flawless. Everything about the LP works, and the production perfectly matches Asia's rapping to create what I would consider to be his best album by far. Again, a lot of people missed out on this one, but an official pressing was released in 2019, and you can still pick it up fairly cheap. Freddy Fox, Crazy Like a Fox. I'm not sure why Epic Records decided to shelve Bumpy Knuckles' 1994 sophomore album right before release, though I would imagine that Fox probably wasn't the moneymaker they had hoped for when they signed the ultra-hardcore, no-frills lyricist, but ironically, shelving the album resulted in one of the best reissues of all time. Not only did we get the original album that was planned for release in 1994, but that also included a second disc, which is all the DITC-produced demos featuring production from Showbiz, Lord Finesse, and Buck Wild. The album also has some guest features from Tupac, Cool G Rap, and Chuck D, and if you're into that raw, early 90s hardcore hip-hop, then this is an essential release. Ras Kass, Van Gogh. Another casualty of label politics, longtime Ras Kass fans will probably remember the turmoil he suffered through with Priority Records in the early 90s. From not being able to agree on which single to release for Assassination, to outright shelving both this 2001 album and the 2003 follow-up, Golden Child. Now, if we're being perfectly honest, Van Gogh is probably my least favorite Ras Kass album. While I do agree with the majority of people that Soul on Ice was Ras at his very best, I've never necessarily subscribed to the thought that he has an overall weak discography. In fact, I think a good majority of the albums are fairly solid, but for whatever reason, Van Gogh just never clicked with me. It sounded messy, trapped between wanting to be a mainstream album and remain true to his underground roots, while never striking a good balance between the two. Of course, that didn't stop me from purchasing this album not once, but twice. Though the album was shelved, it didn't stop them from getting a bootleg CDR release in the UK in 2001, and again saw a slightly more official release in 2014. Young Z, musical Meltdown. Z is probably best known as a member of the New Jersey collective The Outsiders, as well as for being affiliated with artists like the Fugees and Eminem. But back in 1996, when this album was primed to be released, Z seemed like he could legit be the next big personality in hip-hop. Featuring production from Ski Beats, as well as features from KRS-One, Lauryn Hill, and Busta Rhymes, the album had all the makings to be another late 90s classic. Sadly, after a negative review in the Source magazine receiving only 2 mics, the label decided not to pursue an official release and pulled the album at the last second, leaving it to linger in bootleg status for the better part of a decade. Thankfully, it was rediscovered, for lack of a better word, in 2015 and given the official release that it always deserved. Z has always been one of my favorite rappers, and being able to finally own his debut album was an incredible feeling. It is infinitely better than the Source magazine review would lead you to believe, and I think it's definitely worth checking out. QTip, Kamal the Abstract. When the driving force behind one of hip-hop's most beloved groups, as well as the producer for some of the most influential albums that come out of the early 90s, can't get an album released, you know something has gone terribly wrong. But that's exactly what happened with Q-Tip's 2002 sophomore album, Kamal the Abstract. Featuring a blend of genres, the album could best be described as eclectic and experimental, combining seemingly every genre of music that ever inspired Q-Tip. The record label at the time couldn't see any commercial appeal in Tip's wild, abstract experimentation and decided to shelve the already completed project. It wasn't officially released until 2009, and while it's definitely a departure from his more traditional jazz-influenced hip-hop, Q-Tip still paved the way for a lot of artists with this one, and even though it is experimental, I still think this one's worth checking out. Just go into it with an open mind. Nas, I Am, the Autobiography. Long before 2004's Street's Disciple, the original I Am was intended to serve as Nas's first crack at releasing a double disc album. Sadly, after numerous leaks, the original double disc idea was scrapped and the album was reworked with new tracks to create what I consider to be one of Nas's most underrated projects in his legendary discography. Yes, this was around the time that people started to complain that Nas picked bad beats, but in retrospect, nearly everything about the reworked album works and serves as another solid release to the QB Legends discography. That being said, the original track listing featured some of Nas's best work, some of which would appear on other projects such as The Lost Tape and QB's Finest compilation. Thankfully, to the delight of Nas fans everywhere, and at the height of the immaculate 6-album run with producer Hit Boy, the original, or at least as close as original as possible version, was released in 2023 as a Record Store Day exclusive. This one's kind of cheating. It was never officially released on CD, but just the fact that we got this album after all these years, I felt it was important enough to earn its inclusion on this list, and I think it's incredible that we actually finally got the double album version of Nas's I Am. And there we go. There's 10 lost hip-hop albums that you can officially own. The majority of them you can get on CD. Obviously, the Nas I Am was a vinyl only. Still worth tracking down though. Anyways, I appreciate you guys checking this one out. I'm hoping to try out some new videos here in the future. It's not just going to be a bunch of top 10 lists. I will have some more videos going through the CD collection. We'll get back to that. But thank you for checking it out, and I appreciate it. Have a good one.